I wanted to talk about Spider-Man today. Between being one of the most expensive Magic sets I have ever seen, and I think the Magic community will see to date, but also being one of the most popular, I can't really tell where to place this set. There's people who are so excited because I guess they love Spider-Man a lot, but equally there's a lot of people pretty upset with how they've implemented this set. But as a channel tradition, I always do a rating of all the mythic cards in the set. This time, however, I'm going to be taking things a little differently. I think in the interest of kind of what everyone is going for, when they want to know what mythics are going to be noteworthy in Magic, it's probably going to be whether or not they're going to actually want the mythic. And generally, the biggest barrier for people when they're trying to get a card is how much it's going to cost them. I've had a pretty good run. You can see my Edge of Eternities and Final Fantasy reviews of mythics. I had pretty good run of predicting the price range of where a lot of these cards are going to fall. And I've thought a lot about this new set here. We only got 15, which is another whole story in itself about how this set is supposed to be, or was supposed to be, a smaller set, but is actually now been rushed into a full-size set. But we have 15 mythics, and in my opinion, it's probably one of the most underwhelming batch in terms of power. That doesn't mean that your favorite character, if you are a Spider-Man fan, is a bad card, but you are going to see probably some pretty interesting price action, and I wanted to talk about the cards here that I think are going to be the chase super expensive. So up the top, I've got, they're going to be cards that are both powerful and also very popular. So there are going to be cards who are going to be iconic characters that might be very popular, but because they're not as strong, probably aren't going to be the most expensive cards in the set. There is a card here that predictably will absolutely be at the top of the list. And then we go all the way down to bulk mythics. These are going to be the cards that pretty plain, they probably don't do anything overly unique, or they're just way too niche. There'll probably be a bit of hype for them at the start, but these are the kind of cards where if you do want a copy of one of these cards, I would definitely be waiting a handful of weeks, because you are going to see the price of this card drop. I would almost certainly bet my life savings on it. Let's kick the list off straight away. We got Anti-Venom, Horrifying Healer. This is a 5 white pip card. The big thing you'll note for this card is when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you're going to resurrect something. That's pretty cool. 5 mana is about the rate you normally pay for these effects in other colors. There's obviously exceptions to this, like black having Reanimate, but generally 5 mana is a fair price to pay, and you get a creature to go with it. Effectively, the exciting bit of this card is the fact that it can avoid taking damage. So really, you're going to use Anti-Venom to block, and basically block anything you want, and he won't be able to take damage instead, and he'll gain counters equal to the amount he would have taken. The thing that will hold this card back is hands down that casting cost. 5 white pips really restricts the kind of decks you can put it in. Could be an interesting commander in its own right. The problem you'll have is what are you going to cast from your graveyard consistently on turn 5? Because keep in mind, you're probably going to want to slam Anti-Venom down as early as possible and have him have a big splashy effect. White isn't really known for putting things to the graveyard, which means you're probably running this in a sort of 2-color deck with white and a color that's good at putting things into the grave. I'm thinking of cards that can mill, so maybe a bit of white-blue action. White-green could potentially do it, and also white-black. We have seen in the past with Doomsday Excruciator, that is a card that is 6 black pips. You can absolutely play that in a 2-color deck. Your land base needs to be pretty spot on though. You need to have pretty much all dual lands. You cannot use any basic lands that aren't white in a deck like that if you want to run Anti-Venom. I think Anti-Venom's cost will hold back his usage, which will probably drive his price down, if we're being honest. He compares pretty similarly to another card called Phyrexian Vindicator. This is 4 white pips, also able to avoid damage completely. That card didn't really see too much play. It was also a 4-mana 5/5 flyer. I think the excitement around this card is probably more so just because Anti-Venom is a apparently very well-liked character, but I do ultimately think that will hold him back here. Anti-Venom is probably going to be the first in, I would probably call, just a tier above bulk mythic. You can probably get this card for pretty cheap. It'll probably be, no more than $5, $2. $2 to $5 is probably what I'd expect it. I don't really want to put price points on these dollars because it's like catching a falling knife, but I would not expect him to be more than that. If you see him for $30 or whatever he's pre-ordering for now, definitely wait for this one. Next up, behold the Sinister Six. So in a line of other cards that involve reanimation, we have a new black mythic, which is about reviving 6 creatures from the graveyard. This is a very odd card, to be honest. The thing about reanimation is you usually just want to reanimate something that can immediately impact the game, right? Reanimating 6 things is very, very overkill in my opinion. Not to mention this competes directly with Reanimate, which is kind of the best way in Commander and a lot of Eternal formats to simply just get something out of the grave. Not to mention, it's a lot harder to reanimate 6 creatures early into the game. You need to fill up your grave. Not to mention, in Constructed, these need to be 6 different creatures. Personally, I would definitely be looking at running stuff like Breach the Multiverse instead in Commander. This is for 1 mana more. Actually, no, for the exact same mana cost even. Isn't that funny? It's called the Sinister Six, but it costs 7 mana. I would have definitely thought this would be a 6 mana card. And even at 6, I would have said it's still weak. I would be running Breach the Multiverse over this card any day. Breach the Multiverse is an instant win card in Commander often. And that gives you 4 things, mills your opponents. It can bring back Planeswalkers too. It is so much more flexible. And this being a mythic, this is probably going to be one of the mythics that if you do pull, you'll probably be a little bit disappointed you didn't get something a lot more exciting, particularly since there is a black mythic in this set that is very, very sought after. Unsurprisingly then, because of how competitive the reanimation space is, Behold the Sinister Six is 100% going to be a bulk mythic. Very thematic. Like, I get that if you really like the characters, you know, please get the card. I'm certainly not slamming you from doing that, but don't expect it to be an expensive card. Let's go straight into the Soulstone. This card gives me a bit of an aneurysm. This is hands down the strongest card of the set in terms of what it offers. Wizards of the Coast 100% knew what they were doing when they printed this card, because now we're going to get a full cycle of these legendary stones. They're probably all going to be 2 mana, tap for mana, indestructible artifacts with an extra upside. The fact it's legendary doesn't mean anything if you are playing a singleton format like Commander. This is an auto-include in any black deck. And I kind of hate the fact that Wizards have done this. We have a lot of cards already in black that auto-includes. I mean, it's not even a black thing. It's effectively, there are a series of cards that just go in every Commander deck, and this absolutely joins the list of them. Just being a 2 mana rock most of the time, that's indestructible, dodges pretty much everything but farewell. That's fantastic. There's a lot of decks out there that run artifact hate just because mana rocks are so widespread. And effectively, this kind of cheapens that a little. I'm a little bit annoyed that we now have a new cycle of cards that are coming that are going to be must-buys. They're all going to be very expensive, like hands down. Particularly, what I'm worried about is if this card is good and constructed. I think this will be a really annoying card to have to get multiple of, and it will hurt a lot of people's wallets. We already have a problem where the best deck in the format, in Standard at least, is extremely expensive compared to everything else, and I expect Soulstone is going to be another in a line of those cards. Probably more expensive, if I have to be honest, just because of how generally good this is. So many Commander decks are going to want this. If you pull a copy of it, the sky's the limit in what deck you can put this in as long as it is in black. And I expect we'll probably have this for every single Infinity Stone we get. Interestingly, because there are 6 Infinity Stones, I do know a little bit about Marvel, I'll be interested to see what the 6th one ends up being. Presumably, we're going to get 1 for each color, but that does leave us with 1 left over. So time will tell what that will be. The reanimation effect in this is not a super upside. It's pretty good, though. Generally, cards that do something useful, so like this is a mana rock with upside, are usually some of the best cards in the game. It doesn't need to be dramatic. This simply becomes in, and effectively, for the small cost of exiling a creature, you can sacrifice a token to it, which will probably be what happens most of the time. You can basically immediately activate the ability to reanimate things. The fact that this is also not sorcery speed, so you can just hold up the mana until the start of until the end of the next, like the person who's just going before you's turn, so that you start your turn and can reanimate something, also is really gross. Definitely going to be a disgustingly expensive card. So in conclusion, you should absolutely hold on to every single copy of the Soulstone. I personally am not looking forward to having to hunt down copies of this card, because this will probably be one of the most expensive cards in Commander that isn't on the reserved list, I reckon. Next up, we have Web of Life and Destiny. There are a couple enchantments at Mythic in this set that kind of have these splashy and exciting abilities. And Web of Life and Destiny is the first one we're going to be covering here. This card is a little bit of a contradiction, let's say. It is another one of these green cards that lets you cheat in a big creature. We've had a few of them. A lot of them aren't particularly powerful because they often have like a turn delay before they do the effect. Web of Life and Destiny, you can play this before combat, go to combat, and then activate it. Here's the catch though, and this is where I think this card is a little bit difficult to... It won't be as effective as people probably think it will be. This card is very expensive, but has a convoke cost, right? Convoke decks often want to play little guys, little tokens, so that you can get a bunch of them early on to cheat something really big by paying them for convoke. You need to build your deck in a way that is going to have the ability to make a lot of cheap creatures, so that you can convoke this ideally. But the thing you're wanting to be able to get out is going to be a very expensive creature. The challenge that this card presents is you're going to need to build a deck with a lot of little guys, but also have enough big splashy game-ending creatures that you can find them when you play this card. Because the worst thing you can do with this card is tap all your creatures or pay its full cost and then not hit a single target on the start of combat. I think that deck building restriction is a little bit difficult to imagine until you try and build around it. And then I think it will become clear that this card has a lot of hurdles to cross, particularly in green, where you have so many good splashy green cards. Finale of Devastation being just the one that jumps into my head, right? I think ultimately this card might just be a little bit too gimmicky to be the next Finale of Devastation, let's say. If you do get this card, have fun building it. I do think there'll be high moments that this card produces, but it's definitely not an S tier threat, or I guess an Avenger level threat if we're in Marvel. And I think because of the competition it has, this is actually the perfect card to wait and pick up later. It's definitely going to get cheap. I would say almost certainly. I don't think constructed formats are going to want this card, which is the kind of thing that would push its price back up. I would expect in time this card to get pretty cheap. Next, let's talk about Gwen Stacy. She is one of 5 cards in this set at Mythic that are part of a cycle where they can be played for both sides. So I'll put both sides up on the screen as well, but basically you are able to pay her as a 2-mana card where she impulse draws you a card and that you could play as long as you control Gwen Stacy. Or you can flip her over into the Ghost Spider for 5 mana, who is kind of this play cards from exile payoff. She's actually the second in these colors. This is blue and white historically haven't had too many play from exile benefits before, so she is in kind of uncharted territory. The other one being the 10th Doctor, who also kind of does his own thing with proliferating and time travel. But Gwen Stacy is probably the first dedicated play from exile commander, and I think that will be really interesting for people. Another really interesting thing, and this is a benefit for all these double-sided commanders, is you could actually kind of cheat on the command tax with these cards. So one of the downsides of playing expensive commanders, so if you were just focused on the Ghost Spider, she's 5 mana, which is probably on the upper middle end of commander prices. Every time your commander dies, you have to pay 2 more for it, right? If you have 5 mana and you play Ghost Spider, she gets removed, and let's say you're on 6 mana, you can actually play Gwen Stacy, the Gwen Stacy side, for 2 more mana. So you can play Gwen Stacy for 4 mana and then flip her over for 5 the next turn. So if you don't hit 7 mana to play Gwen Stacy the following turn, you actually have a way to get Ghost Spider out. And I actually think that's pretty relevant. Being able to cheat on the commander tax is pretty important for commander games. And this is a benefit that applies to all of these cards. Gwen Stacy herself, as sort of in a vacuum what she does, she's probably going to go into every Jeskai related play from exile card, so the 10th Doctor's probably going to want her in the deck. The remove counters piece is pretty interesting. There's probably a way where you can infinitely put counters on her to then remove them and basically exile your whole deck. It will take a bigger brain person than me to figure out, but I suspect if you're building her as a commander, you're going to absolutely want to be putting that in the deck. And I think commanders with the ability to generate card advantage are usually some of the strongest. She also has the payoff, being able to put 1/1 counters on herself. She comes in with haste and vigilance too, so you can effectively have like a big pop-off turn where you play her, start exiling your whole deck, play as many cards as you can, buff her up, try and get her above 21, swing, she's a flyer, you'll probably hit an opponent for 21 damage and take them out of the game with commander damage. I think Gwen Stacy will be very popular, and I think there's probably one other card that I see being the more popular commander than her in this set, which I'll go over soon. But that considered, as well as the fact that Gwen Stacy is a very popular Spider-Man character, I think we'll put her in the second tier of price. Now, I don't think she's going to be as in demand as the Soul Stone, because the Soul Stone is sort of has this universality of use. where effectively there's going to be so many people who want that card, I suspect. Gwen Stacy's going to more appeal to people that want to play Exile Matters and want a Jeskai commander. I think that makes her just slightly less in demand, but I do think she'll be very popular and very expensive in the long run. Let's cover Gwen Stacy's other form. We have Gwenom Remorseless. I had to take that 3 times trying to say that. Apparently Gwenom is a tongue twister for me. This is effectively Bolas's Citadel on a stick. Bolas's Citadel is 1 more mana. However, and is also a game changer. The problem you're going to have, if it wasn't obvious with her, is you have to attack with her. That means you need to leave her out for 1 whole round of turns in order to get the Bolas's Citadel effect, which is a very powerful effect, don't get me wrong. But effectively, the turn you would get her benefit would be turn 6, assuming you played her on turn 5. This would be a turn where you play Bolas's Citadel and can do the effect immediately. There is a lot less hoops to jump through for that kind of card, which is probably the reason why Bolas's Citadel is on a game changer list, and Gwenom here probably never will be on the game changers list. I do think she has value. I do think she will be effective. I think if your opponents know what she does and you play her to the table, and they reckon, like, they've played against Bolas's Citadel before, she probably won't survive. They will absolutely beeline for her, or at least you, because they'll probably go, okay, you need to pay life to use this effect. We're going to all gang up on you this turn, put you down to less than 15 life, or however low they can get you, so that you can't get many activates on Gwenom. She does have lifelink, which is useful. She has Death Touch, meaning she's kind of awkward to attack into. Having said that, though, you're probably not going to want to block with her, because you want her to survive till your next turn. So if your opponent attacks you with a 12-12, they're probably going to say, well, either my 12-12 dies, and your Gwenom dies, or I deal 12 damage to you, which I think a lot of players will take as a trade. Being a creature is the biggest downside this card has, sadly. Still a really cool character. I'm sure there's a lot of Spider-Man fans really happy to see with her. And I'm sure, because of her popularity as a character, she's going to probably be one of those cards that remains very expensive. I think Gwenom is absolutely the kind of card that ends up smack bang in the middle here, because her power level is low, but her flashiness and popularity is high. Next up, let's talk about Imposter Syndrome. They made the funny Spider-Man point meme into a card. I'm sure some universes beyond hater will absolutely be seething over the existence of this card, but this is the next in the line of splashy enchantments that kind of do something interesting if you can have it survive. This one's kind of interesting because it lets you clone creatures and makes them non-legendary. I'm almost certain that's because in this set, there are so many legendary creatures, they could just have it be a generic clone. That's probably the most interesting thing about this effect. The problem you have is that it's 6 mana. You can, however, play this on turn 6, and you already have a board of legendary creatures, or creatures in general, ready to go, and they can swing. I think, however, there are a few hoops stopping you from doing that. So the fact that you play this, your opponents can interact with it before you attack even. Smart players will see that and go, okay, well, I'm going to destroy the enchantment, or I'm going to destroy the creature that you're going to try to attack with. There's a level of agency there. And compared to some of the other cards that, you know, generally fetch a higher price, they usually try and minimize the level of interaction your opponents have. Imposter Syndrome is probably going to be the kind of card that goes really well in some absolutely goofy decks. There's some very funny cards that you can, when you make multiple copies of them, you can do very silly things. Like, for example, maybe you put this in a Layla Cunning Conjurer. And then every time you cast a spell on your opponent's turn, you make 2 fairies. That sounds kind of fun. And I think Imposter Syndrome probably has use in because of that. The fact that it is only blue also means that it's a lot more flexible to put in decks. Any commander in blue can probably run this card, and you can effectively use it with a commander that wants 2 copies of it. But I think, despite the goofiness, it probably is held back a little bit by power. But I do think, because of the fun around being able to play a card like this, it will probably be a tier above Web of Life and Destiny. This is a pretty unique effect, being able to clone clone legendary creatures still. It's not on too many effects, and I think there'll be some demand in it because of that. Let's go to a personal favorite card of mine for this set. There's not too many cards that have really caught my eye, but Eddie Brock here is a particularly interesting effect for me. Both sides of him are really fascinating. The first side will return a creature with mana value 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is a 3 mana resurrect. There's not too many crazy, insane 1-drops. You might roll your eyes when you hear, oh, 1-drop, woo, who cares? There are quite a few powerful 1-drops. keep in mind. Esper Sentinel comes to mind, but obviously that isn't in white. You could humorously, I guess, bring back Ragavan. But the kind of thing I think you want to bring back with Eddie is the kind of card that actually wants to die. So, for example, Clockwork Percussionist is a monkey card that was made in Duskmourn that lets you impulse draw when it dies, right? This is the kind of card that I would want to bring back with Eddie, flip him over into on his Venom Lethal Protector side, and then sacrifice the monkey to draw a card with Venom and also impulse draw. Another card that I think could be really good with this is Greedy Freebooter, for example. This is a card that lets you scry, make a treasure. I think you're going to want to pair him with creatures that want to die. That's kind of what they were going with for here. And yes, it's not as flashy, as exciting as bringing back a big, exciting creature, but I think that's what makes it interesting. You have to build your deck in a certain way where you're pairing it with cheap creatures that have utility rather than, oh, here's Ragavan, right? And Venom Lethal Protector, I think, is actually a really good card. The fact he has haste, he gets in and can immediately get you value immediately. You can sacrifice so many creatures that give you benefits too, and you get to draw cards with it. Then on top of that, you can then put a permanent in. I think there's a lot there. The fact it's a permanent and not just a creature as well, that's pretty powerful. I don't think you can underrate that. And if you're a commander player looking for things that are interesting to brew, that opens up a lot of options for you. You can bring in a planeswalker with that, a battle, an enchantment. You can have sort of a secondary kind of theme to your deck that I think Eddie Brock really lends himself to. I think being a 3-mana 3/3 that returns a 1-drop as well makes him very constructed playable. I think he will be potentially really good in standard, in the right meta, particularly with all these 1-drops. That Greedy Freebooter and Clockwork Percussionist I mentioned are still standard legal, and I think that matters a lot. I think there will be demand for Eddie here. And I think because of that, this might actually be one of the higher ranked mythics. I think he's the kind of card that will start out mediumly priced, but I think if he finds value, and especially constructed value, he'll actually shoot up quite a bit, I think. The fact he's legendary means constructed players probably won't want to run more than 2 to 3 copies of him tops. But I do actually think in the long term, as a Jund commander and as just a black card in general that can resurrect something, Eddie's going to be one to watch. I'm definitely really confident about this card being expensive in the long run. Next up, let's talk about Mr. Negative. You could probably apply that label to a lot of Magic the Gathering fans towards this set. Ha ha ha, very funny. He's very unique. He is a new life swap kind of effect to the game. He costs 7 mana though, meaning I would not be playing him as a commander. I would be running him in a deck that is in white-black, that cares about maybe hurting yourself, getting your life total low to play cards with a payoff, such as Death's Shadow. That's a pretty hard card to play in Commander. And then playing Mr. Negative towards the end to then switch lives with someone to get yourself back up to top. Having said that, that would probably kill Death's Shadow, but there's a lot of other ways to get benefit from losing life, right? Black has all these kind of effects that are like, oh, I'm going to pay half my life and I'm going to draw half my deck, you know? And Mr. Negative probably is your saving grace in those kind of decks that want to try and churn out value quickly and then find a way to bounce back before burning themselves out. You could run him in the command zone in that kind of deck and hope you get to 7 mana before you self-destruct. What I think is more likely with a card like Mr. Negative is you're going to want to reanimate him. Anytime I see a card with 7 mana, 8 mana cost, I'm thinking, especially in black, I'm thinking, all right, here's my reanimate target of the set. I think white-black decks might want to, you know, pay a bunch of life, Necropotence themselves, although having said that, Necropotence put stuff in exile, so probably not that. But they'll probably want to mill themselves out for life, develop their board, and then you've milled Mr. Negative out. You might see where I'm going with this. You're going to play Reanimate, pay 7 life. You might be on 5 life at this point, slam down Mr. Negative from the grave, and then you're going to exchange life totals with the healthiest player on the table. Maybe you get their 50 life because they're a life gain deck, and then they get stuck with your 5 life. You swing with your creatures and win the game. I think that's really cool. And I think that will have potential in Commander because of that. Definitely don't run this as a Commander unless you really, really think you can get to turn 7 and play this. You're right. I think particularly if you're the kind of deck that wants to get the most value out of Mr. Negative, I think you're going to want to basically run him in a deck that can hurt yourself and somehow put him in the grave. Like we got Entomb. Entomb is in Commander. He's probably one of the best Entomb targets in the deck. Interestingly, if you swap life with a player that is, let's say, less healthy than you, you are going to draw cards. This can be as minute as, oh, hey, you have 5 less life than me. Yeah, I'll take 5 damage to draw 5 cards. That's fantastic. I think that also has utility there. He's also in the blink colors, funny enough. There may be a world where you can run a deck where you're going to blink him over and over again. I would not run him as the commander of a blink deck because your opponents will see what you're trying to do, and they'll probably remove him while you're trying to blink him. Obviously, you have layers of blinks to protect him, so I try and blink him. My opponent removes him in response, and then in response, I blink again. There is a level of safety there, but if 3 players know what you're doing and are probably going to gang up on you, you're probably going to have a hard time blinking him repeatedly. I think that will also be one of the saltiest ways you can play him too. I think depending on how he goes in the long run, he may end up being one of the saltiest cards in Commander going forward because players hate seeing their life go from 40 to 5 because of one card. Soren Markov reminds me of that a lot. This is a Planeswalker that can immediately set someone's life to 10. Pretty hated card in Commander. Mr. Negative kind of echoes that vibe, but I think he has a little bit more juice to him than that. I think he will see some pretty interesting play because of it. Probably not constructed play, but I do think he's an interesting Commander card. Because of his kind of niche application, though, don't expect him to be too expensive, which is probably a good thing if you're looking to pick up a copy of this card. I'll probably put him up above Imposter Syndrome, though. Next up, let's talk about Cosmic Spider-Man. This is the most Commander card, I think, of the set to me. Was absolutely printed to be the, what if I wanted to run all the Spider People cards? He has 5 colors, meaning you can run every single card known to man and put it in your deck. He's very clearly designed for every single spider in the set, because he gives them all a bunch of keywords. Not overly interesting. I think he definitely just exists because the design team were like, well, what if Commander players want to run every Spider-Man card? This is your guy. 100% hands down, this is going to be the commander you run, unless you want to do Joe to the Unifier and run him with all the legendary Spider People, which probably will be better, let's be honest, because Joe to the Unifier / SpongeBob is a very juiced up card. The Cosmic Spider-Man is your Spider-Man version of that card if you want to basically run a all spider themed deck. There's not really much more to say about this card. I think it probably won't see constructed play. It'll probably be just a card you have in your command zone. And unless it's your commander, it's probably not going to be in your deck. Pretty predictably, this is the kind of card where if you do want a copy of it, definitely wait for the hype around spiders to die down, and then you should be able to pick up your copy for very, very cheap. This is no way this card is going to be expensive going forward. It's way too narrow. All right, let's talk about Doc Ock. I actually really like this character. I'm not overly invested in the Spider-Man series, but I did like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and I really, really liked Doc Ock in that. But here's Doc Ock Master Planner. He has 7 mana, so if you remember what I said about every time I see a card in black that costs 7 or more mana, I'm immediately thinking reanimate target. And he actually has an interesting reanimation effect. He does have an end to the battlefield. Well, no, actually, he doesn't have an end to the battlefield effect. I'm lying. But he does do something at the end of the turn you reanimate him, so I'll give him a pass there. The first bit about villains getting +2/+2 and making a max hand size 8, yeah, that's cute. I don't think it really matters that much. You're going to run him because you want that last effect of his, where at the beginning of your end step, you're going to draw to 8 cards. That echoes a lot of Atraxa the Unifier. This is a card in Constructed that players often reanimate to be able to refill their hand. Dr. Octopus here is a Dimir version of that, meaning he's a lot more flexible to include in your decks. To run a Atraxa Grand Unifier, you need to be in all 4 of those colors, whereas here, you only need to be in 2 colors. I think that gives Doc Ock a very specific niche of being a card refueling target for reanimation. Definitely his main appeal here. Grand Atraxa, or Atraxa Grand Unifier isn't in Standard anymore, so he might do the same thing in Standard too. He may also be the leader of some kind of villains deck. I personally think Green Goblin, who we'll cover shortly, makes a better villain card personally, because a lot of the villains have Mayhem, which Green Goblin cares about a lot. But again, if you have a blue-black deck that cares about reanimating, and really you're looking for some kind of card that will let you draw a few more cards, Doc Ock, here's your guy, 100%. That will be the best thing you can do. And look, he might have only 4 power, but the 8 toughness means a lot of people aren't going to get through him. And look, I don't think you need him to be a big deadly attacker. He doesn't really have keywords like Atraxa, but again, I can't emphasize enough the fact he has only 2 colors makes him a very unique card draw card. Grizzlebrand in mono black is banned because of its ability to be reanimated, pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. Doc Ock is kind of this. Now I won't say he is Grizzlebrand. Let's be honest. Grizzlebrand is banned in so many formats for a reason, but you got to remember Doc Ock kind of can do this. He draws an extra card. You don't have to pay the life. He does it at your end step, meaning that opponents can react to it. But again, reanimate this bad boy and you will not be disappointed. I think Doc Ock, because of that exact utility and how popular being able to reanimate things and get value out of them is, I expect Doc Ock to be a pretty middle range card, specifically for that strategy. Next up, let's talk about Miles Morales. This is a new Naya commander involving +1/+1 counters, or counters of really any kind. Because he is a counter doubler on his other side, but also just a general utility 2-drop that can put counters around. I think the power of Miles is his flexibility. Once again, this is another double-sided card, meaning if you need him to be a 2-drop early that you can then spread counters to, he can buff himself and one other creature, which effectively makes him a 2-mana 3/4 if you pair him with a 1-drop. Really good, actually. And then you can flip him later to basically be a first strike haste creature able to protect himself. I think he probably has more use in Constructed than he does in Commander, but I do think he's a really interesting +1/+1 counter Voltron style commander, actually, simply because he comes with the protection himself. And you can do it over and over again. I'm just going to pay 2 mana to put a counter on him and give him hexproof. So you can't remove him. Doesn't protect himself from board wipes, obviously, but a lot of these cards don't. But I like him. I think he's probably going to be pretty reliable. I don't think he's going to absolutely break any format. I think he'll be a pretty fun commander, and I think he'll be a pretty fun card in Constructed. He's probably one of the more playable mythics in Constructed, simply because of that flexibility. And again, I don't think it can be understated how valuable it probably will be to be able to play his cheap side and flip him over for 6 mana later when you have lots of command attacks. So he's died twice, and he costs 12 mana to play on his other side. Or I'm just going to play Miles Morales with, +6 mana because he's died 3 times for 8 mana, and then I'm going to flip him over for 6 later. I think that is pretty meaningful in the late game where you don't have too many things. Doesn't happen too much, but it probably matters for a commander game. I think Miles Morales, because of that flexibility and the popularity of the character, probably sits at the bottom of B tier for me. Next up, let's talk about Spider-Verse. Fittingly, after talking about Miles Morales, we have to talk about the movie trilogy that is kind of centered around him. I know it's not actually involved with this set, but they've definitely taken a lot of the story beats from it to try and make us think that the Spider-Verse trilogy is in this set. This is deceptively not just a Spiders card. This is fittingly a play from exile payoff. So the thing about it, though, is that because it's mono red, it won't just be Gwen Stacy taking advantage of this card, it will be Prosper Tomebound and Feldorn. There are a lot of play from exile commanders that might be interested in this card, because the payoff is to copy. Copying spells is one of the most broken things you do, because they are always copies of cards in your deck, which are always good cards, because we never put bad cards in our deck. And the only thing holding this card back, though, is once per turn. They had to put once per turn on this. And that's a big drawback. Effectively, you gotta hope that whatever you're impulse drawing is something really relevant, which probably will happen. And I think this card is serviceable because of that, but the once per turn thing holds this card back. If this wasn't once per turn, this would be one of the strongest commander mythics of the set. It's probably still a little bit too memey for Constructed. By the time you get to turn 5 and set this up, you're probably dead, or you're probably close to dead, or your opponent is playing control and will just counter this. This is absolutely designed for Commander, but it's such a cool Commander card. There's so many cool ways to play things from exile, and yeah, the once per turn will hold it back, unfortunately. Having said that, it definitely has some potential, and it sits among good crowd. Like, I think the cards it's sitting here with, Mr. Negative, Anti-Venom, they're definitely not bad cards. They're just not the strongest in the Commander format compared to some of the other things you can be doing, but Commander's not entirely about power. It's about fun, and I think this has got to be one of the funnest cards you can play. All right. We're down to the last 2 Spider characters, and fittingly, I have chosen the main villain and the main hero. First up, we'll cover Norman Osborn. This is a pretty exciting discard matters commander, and will, in my opinion, be the best and most popular commander of the set. Norman Osborn, hands down, promotes a new type of gameplay, Grixis discard. Izzet has kind of always dominated this space before, and there are elements of it in Rakdos with Madness. This takes that to a whole new level. I think Norman Osborn will be the glue that holds a discard deck together, not because of his human side. Having said that, it's perfectly serviceable. You can play a 2/2 that draws you and discards stuff. Curves really nicely into Monument to Endurance. It's going to be Green Goblin that absolutely steals the show. You're going to jam Green Goblin down, you're going to be discarding cards, and you're going to be cheating them out of your grave. They cost 2 less. That is 3 mana rocks. That is 1 mana impulse draws. That's going to be so good. I think Norman Osborn probably has a lot of constructed potential, but I also think he's going to, like I said, hands down be the most popular commander. If I didn't already have too many Rakdos and Grixis themed commander decks, I reckon I'd be building him. I'm going to be trying to get copies of this card, and I think I'll be paying through the teeth for it, let's be honest. And I think it will stay that way long term. I think he'll be a pretty definitive Grixis commander in the future. Not only that, I do think he's also probably a really high power level commander too. I think you can do some very gross stuff. Grixis is a pretty powerful color combination. And hands down, I think he's top of A. He's going to be just short of Soulstone. I don't think he's going to be Soulstone expensive, let's be honest. I think Soulstone is kind of in a league of its own. If anything, I should put a gap between these cards. But I do think Norman Osborn is going to be a pricey card, alongside Gwen and probably Eddie a little bit below. And then last up, we have Peter Parker. The original, and unfortunately not the best. Peter Parker here is sadly, probably, in my opinion, the weakest of the bunch here. He comes in as a 0/1 and makes you a 2/1. So you're getting 2/2 for a 2-drop. 2 bodies is interesting, and the spider does have reach. That's cool, I guess. And the other side of him is this kind of web slinging, which is a new mechanic, Legends Matter Commander. This compares a little bit to Ninjutsu. Yuriko, the Tiger's Claw, I think she's called, is one of the most powerful commanders. She's on the Game Changers list as a commander. And she cheats in Eldrazi and all kinds of other annoying things with Ninjutsu. Because web slinging requires, or this particular iteration of web slinging requires the creature to be legendary, you are far more limited in the kind of crap you can cheat out. The main one that comes to mind is, I don't know, Jin Gitaxias Core Augur. You can cheat in Jin for 3 mana and then make everyone discard their hand at the start of their turn. Like, that's not very fun to play against, let's be honest. Ninjutsu is pretty loathed because of that. And Peter Parker probably, in his strongest form, will be doing something similar. I am struggling to think of really powerful legendary creatures that are on the plane of Eldrazi and other ninjutsu cheaty targets, in green, white, and blue of all colors too. There'll probably be some out there. Peter Parker decks probably won't be very powerful though if they're not doing that. And if they are, they'll probably be pretty hated. Which is kind of a shame for this character, given how popular, you know, Spider-Man is. What I do think Peter Parker will do well, because it's not all doom and gloom, is he will be a powerful constructed card in self-bounce and blink decks. So Peter Parker here is a premier target to return to your hand to play again. There's definitely a lot of strategies right now that are looking for permanents to be able to return to the hand with Nurturing Pixie and Fear of Isolation. These kind of cards are great with Peter Parker. You play Peter on 2, you return him with Nurturing Pixie, you do it again, and you just build a spider army and just go wide and knock opponents down. These are the right colors as well to go wide, so you might have a really interesting tokens angle with Peter Parker. That's ironically the most interesting thing you can probably do with him, which is sad given the fact that all these other double-sided cards, you know, they have these big, splashy, expensive sides, and the Amazing Spider-Man of all of them kind of falls flat in my opinion. This card is kind of the poster child for flavor fail for this set in my opinion. The web slinging stuff is cool, but the mechanic is just, it doesn't feel like it for me. Having said that, Peter here is undoubtedly going to be an expensive card. He is the poster child of Spider-Man. There will be demand for him, just like there was demand for Cloud and Sephiroth. I think, however, he will probably fall over time to sort of a middling range of value. I didn't mean for it to end up like this, but I've actually got all 5 of the double-faced mythics together. I do think there'll be a lot of interest in those cards in particular. But basically, anything B and above, I would say here, if you snab a copy of it, you're going to be pretty happy. Or if you see a price you're willing to pay for it, as long as it's past pre-order. Remember, do not pre-order cards. The pre-order prices always like drop dramatically. But within the first week, if you do see one of these singles on your shelf in B tier and above, I'd definitely be sniping them. Personally, if you really do want the card, it's probably a fair price to pay. C and D, I would definitely be waiting a little longer. Hopefully this was a pretty helpful litmus test for you. Are there any cards in here you think I've gotten completely wrong? I'd be really interested to talk about them in the comments. I do always love reading your comments. Some are much more creative than others. And let me know what you'd like to cover next on this channel. Till then, see you in the next one. Cheers.